Hey guys, Tom here from Metalloud, and it's time to review the new album from Deftones called Gore. Deftones kind of came out during the whole nu metal scene during the late 90s to early 2000s, and they really started off as this aggressive, fairly simplistic band until around the early 2000s, where they started to branch out a little bit and shed that nu metal style. They're one of the few bands from that era that kind of did, and they took on this whole unique persona and music style that has kind of progressed and continued to today. And this time we get the album called Gore from the band, and it's definitely a step in a same direction that they've kind of been taking, but it also changes things up a little bit. This is a much more atmospheric album than they've ever released. It's kind of very smooth. A lot of the songs are almost lighter in a lot of ways, and yet some of them are even heavier than things that they've done. A lot of times it gets sludgy and almost oppressively heavy with the guitar work on here, and with Chino's vocal work on here. The production, particularly with the vocal work, is kind of mixed. When he's doing his smooth vocals, it's generally clean and it's generally easy to hear, but occasionally it kind of sounds tinny. It almost sounds like he's going through like an old microphone, and that definitely sounds like a product of the production itself, that was done purposefully. And while it works on some songs, occasionally it can be a bit grating on a few of the songs, but overall it kind of works with the flow. It works with the feeling that they're going for on this album. The album kicks off with the track Prayers/Triangles, which I think is an excellent opening track. Again, it starts off very kind of light and smooth with that atmospheric guitar work on here, and Chino's vocal works, which again, generally lighter on this track. You get songs like Doomed User, which is a much heavier track on here. Towards the middle of the album, I think, is where the album really kind of just kicks off more and really just takes off from there with the song Heart/Wires, which really kind of starts off slowly, builds up to this just crazy chorus that kicks in. It's a very catchy song. It's probably one of my favorite tracks off of this album. I think it's probably the best track off this album. From that point on, which is kind of the midway point through this album, it definitely starts things off. This is where I think the second half is much better than the first half. However, the first half is still very well done. I definitely enjoy it. Particularly this album kind of took me a few listens to really get into, and I think that's something that is indicative of this album itself. It's so kind of experimental and weird and out there that it really does take a few tries to kind of embrace it and to actually get into these songs on here. But once you do, you're going to find something that's very interesting for this band and for music in general. There's not a lot of bands that are doing what Deftones are kind of doing with their layering and everything on this album that's done well. And as we move on to the second half of this album, we get songs like Gore, which is definitely my favorite track off this album, and the Chino screams on here are just perfect, and there's just such a nice blend of the clean vocals with the screaming, and then that dragged out ending is just fantastic. It just keeps on going, and I love that kind of sludgy guitar work on here. And the album actually ends on a fairly high note. Again, Rubicon is a definite nice blend of everything, and I feel it really kind of sums up the album as a whole and kind of brings in all the elements that make this album Gore what it is. Now, as far as the guitar work on here, it's a little bit simplistic overall. It's not, at least the rhythm guitar parts are kind of chuggy in a lot of ways. Like I said, there's some definitely sludge influence on here, but just overall, this is definitely a Chino album. The vocal work really takes a starring role on this album, and in general, Deftones kind of usually embraces that. I mean, Chino is a huge name in the music industry, but this album really puts him in the front. This is light on the guitar work. Like I said, there's really while a lot of the guitar work is definitely creating this atmosphere that the album is trying to go for, a lot of it is kind of taking a backseat to Chino's vocal work on here. Now, that's again not really a bad thing on this album. It works. It's what this album is trying to cultivate, and I really enjoy it. But if you're kind of looking for something that's definitely an intricate guitar work, you're not really going to find that on this album. But everything that they've done feels purposeful. It feels experimental, but it feels like they experimented with a purpose in mind, and everything on Gore really works to this degree. And like I said, it took me a few listens to get into. Probably for a lot of people, it's going to be about the same thing. You may not like it as much as you will in the future on your first listen. I suggest giving it a few tries if you're not that into it, especially if you are a Deftones fan. There's a lot to like on this album. I definitely enjoyed it a lot, and I think you would too.